Six ruthless bikers rolled into a late-night bar, thinking they'd found easy prey, a famous rapper, fresh off a performance, unwinding alone. But what they didn't realize was that Snoop Dogg wasn't just any rapper. He was a cultural icon, a leader, a man whose influence stretched far beyond music. And by the end of the night, the Steel Wolves MC would learn a brutal lesson about choosing the wrong target. Their leader? He'd walk away with a revelation that would change everything. This is the story of how a notorious biker gang messed with the wrong rapper and how one man's quiet strength transformed an entire community. Before we dive in, let us know where you're tuning in from in the comments. And if this story hits home, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've got something even bigger for you. The dim glow of Snoop's Groove Bar cast long shadows across the empty parking lot. Inside, Snoop sat at the bar, his signature locks hanging loose over his shoulders, still in his performance gear after a grueling show. His posture was relaxed, his fingers wrapped around a glass of iced tea, but behind that calm exterior was a man who had built an empire, someone who understood power in ways few could. "You really should head home, man." DJ Dre slid onto the stool next to him, shaking his head. That show was wild. Snoop let the ice-cold glass cool his tired hands. "I will. Just need a minute to breathe first." The bar was quiet at this hour, mostly night shift workers and late-night wanderers. Behind the counter, Vanessa, the bartender who had traded a high-flying career for a simpler life, moved gracefully between customers, pouring drinks with a practiced ease. "That beat you dropped tonight?" DJ Dre continued, voice low. "If you hadn't brought the house down with that bass, we'd all be in for a slow night." Snoop smirked. "We all did our part." They both knew that wasn't the full story. Snoop's presence alone had changed the room, just like it always did. Then came the sound. A deep, rolling rumble in the distance, growing louder, vibrating through the asphalt. It echoed off the surrounding buildings, unmistakable. Motorcycles. 6 of them. They pulled into the lot, chrome glinting under the neon glow of the bar's signage. The riders, clad in worn leather vests, carried the insignia of a snarling wolf. Steel Wolves MC, notorious. Dangerous. They didn't just ride in, they took space. Vanessa froze mid-pour, the bottle trembling slightly in her grip. Behind the bar, Joe, the owner, a man who had seen his fair share of bad nights, watched them with narrowed eyes. The leader was the first through the door. Wolf. Salt and pepper beard, cold eyes, a man used to commanding respect through fear alone. His enforcer followed, a mountain of muscle known as Tank. Behind them, for more, each with a reputation soaked in violence. Snoop didn't turn. Didn't move. But his posture shifted just enough. He'd been in enough rooms to know how to read a threat. And right now, the air was thick with one. Well, Wolf's voice carried through the bar as he scanned the room. "Looks like we found ourselves a nice little quiet spot for a late-night snack." The bikers spread out, claiming their territory. Tank knocked over a chair as he passed, the sharp crack of wood making several patrons flinch. Another, Razor, ran his fingers along the bar, knocking over a row of glasses just because he could. Vanessa took a breath, forcing confidence into her voice. "Can I get you gentlemen something to drink?" Wolf grinned. It didn't reach his eyes. "Sure thing, sweetheart. Why don't you start by telling me what a pretty thing like you is doing in a place like this?" DJ Dre tensed beside Snoop, but Snoop's hand found his arm, a silent command. "Not yet. I'm just doing my job," Vanessa replied, taking a small step back. Wolf's right-hand man, Snake, chuckled. "Honey, with a face like that, you should be doing something a lot more interesting than serving drinks to these folks." In the corner booth, an elderly couple quietly tried to gather their things. But Ghost, the gang's silent shadow, stepped into their path. "Leaving so soon?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow, it was more menacing than Wolf's loud bravado. Then, a voice cut through the air. Soft. calm, but impossible to ignore. Leave them alone. All eyes turned. Snoop still hadn't moved. Still hadn't turned around. He took another sip of his iced tea, setting the glass down with deliberate ease. Wolf's expression darkened. He stepped closer. What was that, buddy? Now Snoop turned, slowly, deliberately. And when their eyes met, something flickered across Wolf's face. Just for a second. A hesitation. Snoop wasn't some random rapper in the wrong bar at the wrong time. He was something else. Someone else. Snoop's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. I said, leave them alone. Tank cracked his knuckles, stepping closer. Looks like we got ourselves a brave little rapper here, boss. Wolf smirked, leaning against the bar. You know what happens to people who don't mind their own business in this town? Snoop didn't blink. Do you? And in that moment, something shifted. The energy in the room. The weight of history. The realization that maybe, just maybe, they'd picked the wrong man to mess with. And what happened next? Well, that's where things get interesting. The air in the bar grew heavy, thick with tension. DJ Dre started to rise, but Snoop's firm hand on his arm kept him in place. Behind the counter, Joe reached for the phone, but one sharp look from Wolf stopped him cold. Wolf's voice dropped into a dangerous growl. You've got quite a mouth on you. His eyes darkened. Somebody ought to teach you some respect. Snoop exhaled slowly, his voice smooth, calm, too calm. Years in the music industry taught me plenty about respect. He set his glass down deliberately. It also taught me the difference between real leaders and boys playing dress-up on motorcycles. The words hung in the air like smoke. Tank took a menacing step forward, but Wolf held up a hand, his gaze now laced with curiosity. Music industry, huh? His smile turned sharp, predatory. Well, looks like we got ourselves a real celebrity here, boys. Razor let out a short, ugly laugh. What did you do over there, buddy? Hand out mixtapes? Snoop didn't flinch. I use my music to speak for those without a voice. His tone was steady, measured. To educate. To unite. To heal. Those last three words hit differently. Wolf's smirk flickered, his eyes narrowing as he reassessed the man in front of him. For the first time, he saw it. The way Snoop held himself. The quiet calculation behind his gaze. The presence. Wolf leaned in. You're out of your element here, rapper. This isn't your stage. Snoop's fingers drummed once against the bar before he spoke. You're right. He nodded toward the room. This is a place where people come to unwind. To share a moment after long days and longer nights. And right now? He locked eyes with Wolf. You're disturbing that peace. Tank took another step forward. And what exactly are you gonna do about it? The room held its breath. Snoop stood. Fluid. Controlled. Despite Tank's massive frame towering over him, he showed no fear. I'm giving you a choice. His voice cut through the silence. You can leave now, go enjoy your evening somewhere else, and we can all move on with our lives. His pause was deliberate. Or, you can make this difficult. And we'll see exactly what kind of influence I have these days. For the first time, the Steel Wolves hesitated. That unshakable confidence, that presence, it wasn't what they expected. Even Wolf, for just a fraction of a second, seemed to reconsider. But then, he laughed, loud and sharp. You hear that, boys? The little rapper thinks he can take on the Steel Wolves. And yet, something had shifted. The other patrons, who had shrunk into their seats minutes ago, started to sit up straighter. Joe's hand moved away from the phone, not out of fear, but resolve. Even Vanessa stood taller, her shoulders squared, drawing strength from Snoop's quiet authority. Wolf leaned in, his voice a whisper now, meant only for Snoop. You've got no idea what you're starting here, buddy. Snoop held his gaze, unwavering. Neither do you. Wolf's smirk faltered. Just for a moment. The air crackled with tension, like the charged silence before a storm. Tank shifted his weight, his massive shadow stretching across the bar. Wolf scoffed. You think being a celebrity makes you tough? His voice was sharp, but there was an edge of something else now, doubt. This isn't a concert, buddy. This is our territory. Snoop tilted his head slightly. Territory? His tone was almost amused. This is a bar. A place for music, conversation, people unwinding after long shifts. The only ones trying to turn it into a war zone, he let the words settle. Are you? Snake stepped forward, leather creaking. Boss, let me show this guy what happens when people don't know their place. Stand down. Wolf didn't take his eyes off Snoop as he raised a hand, cutting off Snake. Our little hero here deserves a proper lesson in respect. DJ Dre stood now, his voice even, but his heart pounding. Snoop, maybe we should. It's okay, Dre. Snoop's voice remained calm. Why don't you help Vanessa get Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins to safety? They shouldn't have to deal with this nonsense on their anniversary. That single sentence shook the room more than anything else. Not the threats. Not the tension. The control. The way Snoop commanded the moment without raising his voice. Even the bikers seemed thrown off. Ghost, silent until now, spoke from near the door. Boss, something's not right about this one. Wolf ignored him. I don't care if he's the king of hip-hop. His voice was tight, like he was forcing confidence. Nobody talks to us like this in our town. Snoop exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. Your town? His voice carried something dangerous now, not anger, but disappointment. I've spent years lifting up this town. Speaking at schools. Organizing community events. Helping kids find their voices. His eyes never wavered. What have you done, except make people afraid? Razor sneered, knocking over a glass. Listen to him. Acting all high and mighty just because he's famous. Snoop's voice didn't rise, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Platinum albums. Sold out tours. And I didn't just entertain. His tone was quiet, but unshakable. I used my platform to empower communities. To fight against fear. To heal wounds of neglect and violence. I've seen what intimidation does to a neighborhood. And I've spent my life fighting against it. The room fell silent. Even Wolf hesitated. They had walked in expecting an easy target. A celebrity. But this man? This was something else entirely. Wolf's fingers curled into a fist, but his expression had changed. Doubt. Uncertainty. The creeping realization that they had stepped into something much bigger than they were ready for. You think fame makes you untouchable, he muttered. But now, even he didn't seem convinced of his own words. Snoop's reply was calm. Simple. Unshaken. No. Influence makes me clear-headed. And in that moment, everyone in that bar understood. The Steel Wolves had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Experience makes me capable, Snoop said, his voice steady, and compassion makes me willing to give you one last chance to walk away, before this gets unpleasant. Tank let out a harsh, barking laugh. Unpleasant? There's 6 of us and 1 of you, boy. Snoop barely moved. His gaze remained level. Numbers don't mean much when you don't know what you're dealing with. His voice carried an almost lazy confidence, but underneath it was something sharper. Just like those kids on the streets, the ones everyone writes off as lost causes. The difference between chaos and peace? Knowing where to apply pressure. Understanding people. Having a steady hand under pressure. Wolf's smirk faded. He wasn't just listening, he was realizing. Snoop wasn't just talking about music. You threatening us, rapper? Wolf asked, his fingers twitching near the knife on his belt. Snoop shook his head. Not threatening. Warning. There are two kinds of leaders, those who rule through fear and those who lead through respect. Figure out which one I am. Behind him, DJ Dre and Vanessa had guided the elderly couple toward the back of the bar, moving them out of the crossfire. Joe, behind the counter, stood tensely, his hand resting near the bat he kept for emergencies. Then, Snake moved. Quick as a flash, he grabbed a handful of coasters and whipped them toward Snoop's face. But Snoop was already moving. Years of navigating the chaos of fame had trained his reflexes. He sidestepped effortlessly, his expression unchanged. The coasters clattered uselessly to the floor. Snoop exhaled. That was stupid. His voice was soft, almost disappointed. Now you've made a mess. Someone's gonna have to clean that up. Wolf's patience snapped. Enough talk. His voice was sharp. Tank, show our hero here what real intimidation looks like. Tank cracked his knuckles, stepping forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the room. But before he could take another step, Snoop spoke again. His voice wasn't loud, but it stopped Tank cold. Before you do something you'll regret, you should know something. Tank hesitated, confused. Snoop continued, his voice steady. Officer Thompson's son, the one who got into that accident last year? I bailed him out with a benefit concert. Mike and I go way back. In fact, he checks on this bar every night around this time. A pause. A flicker of unease. And wouldn't you know it, Snoop tilted his head slightly, he should be pulling into the parking lot right about now. As if on cue. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. A distant siren grew louder. Wolf's expression twisted into something between rage and realization. You set us up. His voice was low, venomous. Snoop shook his head. No. I just know this town better than you do. I know its people. I've helped them. Protected them. What do you do, except prey on them? The sound of car doors slamming shut outside sent a ripple of uncertainty through the steel wolves. Ghost, who had been silent up until now, took a step back toward the door. His earlier confidence was gone. Boss, he muttered. We should go. We don't need this heat. But Wolf was too far gone. Too much pride. Too many eyes on him. He stepped in close, his voice a low whisper. This isn't over, rapper. Not by a long shot. Snoop held his gaze. Unshaken. Unbothered. You're right, he said smoothly. It's not over. Because tomorrow, I'll be back in the studio, making music that uplifts this community. And you'll still be riding around, trying to convince yourself that fear equals respect. The bar doors swung open. Officer Mike Thompson stepped inside. His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon, his sharp gaze scanning the room. When he saw Snoop, his expression remained professional, but there was an unmistakable flicker of familiarity. Evening, folks. His tone was casual, but there was steel beneath it. Everything okay in here? Wolf hesitated. He wasn't used to being cornered. Finally, he exhaled sharply and stepped back. We were just leaving. He didn't take his eyes off Snoop as he gestured to his crew. Isn't that right, boys? The other bikers nodded. Their earlier bravado? Gone. One by one, they moved toward the exit, past Officer Thompson, past Snoop, past the man they had seriously underestimated. But Wolf couldn't help himself. As he reached the door, he turned back, his voice dripping with a final attempt at intimidation. Sweet dreams, rapper. His smirk was forced. Better watch your back. Snoop's reply was smooth. Effortless. I always do. He took a slow sip of his tea, then lowered the glass. And Wolf, next time you or your crew need something more than intimidation, remember, I've got the community's ear. The difference between them? Snoop didn't need fear. He had influence. The door swung shut behind the bikers. The roar of motorcycles faded into the distance. The tension finally broke. Officer Thompson exhaled, shaking his head. "You all right?" he asked, a mix of professional concern and personal familiarity in his tone. Snoop rolled his shoulders slightly, letting the last of the tension melt away. "I'm fine, Mike." He shot him a knowing look. "They were just trying to intimidate everyone. Nothing I haven't handled before." Slowly, the bar came back to life. DJ Dre clapped Snoop on the back. "Man, you took a hell of a risk." Vanessa reappeared, helping the elderly couple settle back in. Joe, still tense, grabbed a rag and started wiping up the mess. His movements were sharp, the anger still fresh. Officer Thompson slid onto a stool, his voice low. "Those weren't just any troublemakers. The Steel Wolves have been stirring up problems all over the county. We've been trying to build a case against them for months." Snoop poured himself another glass of tea. "Steady hands. Steady mind. They're just bullies, Mike." He took a slow sip. "And like most bullies, they don't know what to do when someone stands up to them. Wolf wasn't known for letting things go. What if they come back?" DJ Dre asked, his voice low. Snoop exhaled, tapping his fingers lightly on the bar. "Then we'll handle it." His tone was simple, absolute. "I didn't build this platform just to let some wannabe tough guys terrorize innocent people." Meanwhile, at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the Steel Wolves were regrouping. A single flickering light cast long shadows over the concrete floor. The scent of motor oil and old sweat clung to the air. Wolf paced, his heavy boots echoing through the empty space, his fury barely contained. A rapper. A damn rapper had made them look weak. "Unacceptable," he spat. Tank leaned against his bike, still nursing his bruised pride. "He's not just any rapper, boss. You heard him, his influence, his community work. I don't care if he's the king of hip-hop." Wolf exploded, his voice echoing off the walls. "Nobody disrespects the Steel Wolves. Nobody." Snake, always eager for blood, stepped forward. "So what's the plan, boss? How do we handle this?" Wolf stopped pacing. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "We send a message." His voice was cold. Calculated. Not just to him. To the whole town. Show them what happens when someone crosses us. Back at the bar, Officer Mike Thompson was taking statements, his notepad filling up with shaky recollections. Mrs. Jenkins, still rattled, reached out and patted Snoop's hand. "That young man," she murmured, "he reminds me of our grandson. Always standing up for what's right." Mr. Jenkins nodded. "Never seen anything like it. Didn't raise his voice, didn't make any threats. Just stood there, like he knew exactly what he was doing." Mike glanced up from his notes. "That's because he did." He closed his notepad with a sharp snap. "Snoop's got more influence than those bikers could dream of. They just didn't realize it." Joe approached with fresh drinks, shaking his head. "I've owned this place for 20 years. Never had trouble I couldn't handle. But tonight was different." His eyes met Snoop's. "If you hadn't been here." "But I was here," Snoop interrupted gently. "And I'll be here again. This is my community too, Joe. I'm not gonna let anyone threaten it." Vanessa, still a little pale, slid into the seat next to DJ Dre. "The way they looked at us, like we were prey or something." She turned to Snoop. "But you didn't seem scared at all." Snoop exhaled slowly, leaning back. "Fear is a choice." They all looked at him. "Fear gets people stuck. I learned to channel it. Use it to sharpen my focus instead of letting it paralyze me." Mike's radio crackled. He stepped away, listening intently. When he returned, his expression was grim. That was the station. The Steel Wolves have been linked to a string of incidents across 3 counties: vandalism, assault, extortion. We've never had enough evidence to make anything stick, until now. DJ Dre perked up. So maybe we've got him. Mike shook his head. Maybe. But Snoop, you need to be careful. These guys, they don't play by any rules. And Wolf's got a reputation for holding grudges. Snoop's jaw tightened. I know the type. He thought back to his years in the industry. He'd seen men like Wolf before, men who built their identity on fear, who lived for control. And the one thing they couldn't handle? Someone standing up to them. Outside, the night had grown quieter. Most of the regulars had left. The ones who remained, they weren't just customers anymore. They were allies. Mike did another sweep of the parking lot before returning. I'll have patrols keep an eye on the place, he said. But maybe you should take a few days off, Snoop. Let things cool down. Snoop shook his head. That's not happening, Mike. I've got shows to plan. Communities to support. I'm not gonna hide. DJ Dre squeezed his friend's shoulder. At least let me drive you home tonight. Safety in numbers, right? Before Snoop could respond, the bar phone rang. Joe answered, his face darkening as he listened. After a tense moment, he turned, handing the receiver to Snoop. It's for you. Snoop already knew who it would be. Wolf. His voice slithered through the line, dripping with false courtesy. Just wanted to make sure you got home safe, rapper. A pause. It's a dangerous world out there. Never know what might happen to someone who doesn't understand their place in the food chain. Snoop's grip on the phone didn't tighten. His heartbeat didn't quicken. His voice remained steady. Is that really why you called, Wolf? To show me you know how to look up a phone number? Silence. Then Wolf's tone hardened. You humiliated us in front of everyone. That doesn't end well for people. Snoop's voice dropped. The same voice he used on stage before massive crowds. The voice that commanded. Let me be very clear. The bar went silent. Everyone was listening. If you or your crew come near this bar again, if you threaten these people or try to intimidate them, you'll learn exactly what a community united behind one man can do. Another pause. Then, click. Snoop hung up. When he looked up, everyone was staring at him. Mike shook his head, a mix of admiration and concern. You really don't back down, do you? Snoop's voice was quiet. Firm. Can't. He exhaled slowly, his fingers drumming lightly on the counter. The moment you start backing down is the moment they win. He stood, grabbing his jacket. And I didn't become who I am to let bullies win. But as he walked toward the door, a thought lingered. Wolf wouldn't let this go. Men like him never did. The question wasn't if he'd retaliate. It was when. And how. Snoop would be ready. Because this time, he wasn't alone. The next morning, the door to Snoop Dogg's recording studio swung open. He stepped inside, his alertness undimmed despite the previous night's events. His team greeted him with daps and nods, sensing his energy. And as he settled in front of the mic, the real fight began. Not with fists, but with words. With music. With a voice powerful enough to shake a whole city. The showdown begins. The studio buzzed with tension as Snoop entered. His manager, Dwayne, approached immediately. Heard about the bar. You okay? Snoop adjusted his headphones. Just another night. Dwayne wasn't convinced. Steel Wolves aren't just troublemakers. Last month, they put 3 people in the hospital. Before Snoop could respond, the door burst open, his crew rushed in, carrying a beaten young man on a stretcher. Found him behind Charlie's club, one of them reported. Before he passed out, he mentioned wolves. Snoop exchanged a knowing look with Vanessa. This was no coincidence. Steel wolves regroup. Across town, Wolf paced angrily in an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by maps and photos of Snoop. A rapper, he spat. A damn rapper made us look weak. Tank, nursing his bruises, muttered, he's not just a rapper. You heard him, his influence, his community work. Wolf slammed his fist on the table. I don't care who he is. We send a message, one the whole town will feel. Escalation. Back at the studio, Snoop and Vanessa treated the young man's injuries. 3 broken ribs, Vanessa whispered. Defensive wounds. They wanted him to suffer. Snoop corrected her. They wanted him found. More victims arrived, the same injuries, the same message. Mike Thompson, the local cop, arrived. Wolf's making his move. He's targeting people connected to you, Snoop. Snoop nodded grimly. Men like him break when their control is challenged. Mike shook his head. We need witnesses to testify. Then we make them feel safe enough to do it, Snoop replied. The threat grows. At Snoop's Groove Bar, the wolves kept appearing, ordering drinks, not paying, testing boundaries. Joe called Snoop. They've been asking about you. Wolf came in today. Sat in your spot for an hour, just staring. Later that night, Snoop's phone rang. Wolf. Just checking in, rapper. Dangerous world out there. Snoop's voice was ice. Is that why you called? To prove you can find a phone number? I'm not impressed. Wolf's tone hardened. You humiliated us. That doesn't end well for people. Snoop's response was calm but firm. Come near this bar again, and you'll learn what a community united behind one man can do. Click. Mike stared at Snoop. You don't back down, do you? Can't. Because backing down meant they won. The first clash. That night, Snake, Ghost, and Razor entered the bar, trying to intimidate Snoop. Last night was just a warm-up, Snake whispered. Now we show you what real fear looks like. Snoop turned to him, unfazed. That's not strength, Snake. That's cowardice. Snake lunged, grabbing Snoop's arm, bad move. With lightning precision, Snoop twisted his wrist against the bar, applying just enough pressure to make him gasp in pain. Fun fact about community leaders, Snoop murmured. We know every nerve cluster, every pressure point. The others moved, but Snoop's voice froze them. Think carefully about your next move. Your friend has 3 seconds before the pain becomes unforgettable. Snake paled, nodding. Snoop released him. As the wolves stumbled back, red and blue lights flashed outside, Mike's patrol car. That would be my backup, Snoop said. I suggest you leave before they run your plates. The wolves retreated, seething. Wolf's gonna hear about this, Snake hissed. Tell him if he has something to say, Snoop replied. He should say it to my face. I'll be here. Tomorrow night. Final warning. At the Steel Wolves warehouse, Wolf raged. A damn rapper embarrassed my best men. Tank stepped forward. Then we hit him with numbers. Overwhelm him. Wolf grinned darkly. No. He wants me to come to him? Fine. But we do this my way. Tomorrow night, we remind this town why they fear us. The showdown. The next night, 30 bikes rumbled into Snoop's Groove Bar's parking lot. Wolf led them in. Where's your army now, hero? He sneered. Snoop sipped his tea, unbothered. Right where they need to be. Across the street, headlights flared on, cars full of studio crew, business owners, and bar regulars. Wolf's expression darkened. You think a few civilians scare us? Snoop stood. No. I think you're already scared. That's why you brought an army. Wolf lunged, blade flashing. Snoop deflected effortlessly, striking a nerve cluster in Wolf's wrist. The knife hit the floor. Wolf stumbled back, stunned. What the? Pressure point manipulation, Snoop explained calmly. Community leaders learn how to heal and how to stop threats. Tank charged. Snoop sidestepped. A precise elbow to the ribs dropped him to his knees. Snake and Razor moved in, but every strike Snoop threw was deliberate, efficient, breaking them down one by one. The bikers hesitated. Joe appeared, shotgun in hand. Vanessa lifted a baseball bat. Outside, dozens of community members stepped forward. This is the difference between us, Wolf, Snoop said softly. You rule through fear. I lead through respect. Wolf looked around. Bikers backing away. His army crumbling. His last move, a desperate charge. Snoop dodged, struck a pressure point in his neck. Wolf collapsed, gasping. Silence. Then, red and blue lights. Mike stepped in. That's enough. Wolf was cuffed, his gang shattered. As officers took statements, Joe shook his head in awe. Never seen anything like it. Vanessa wiped away tears of relief. You taught us something tonight, Snoop. That we don't have to be afraid. Wolf, being led away, growled, You think this makes you a hero? You've made some powerful enemies. Snoop met his gaze. Then they'll learn the same lesson you did. Fear only works if people allow it. As the bar erupted in applause, Snoop knew this wasn't over. The Steel Wolves were part of something bigger. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. You made some dangerous enemies. Hope you're ready for what comes next. Snoop deleted the message. He'd faced worse. And when the next fight came, he'd be ready.